Kenya's President William Ruto has defended the high taxes and government recently imposed taxes, calling them a necessary sacrifice to help the country deal with ballooning foreign debt, which now stands at $70 billion. He was speaking at the celebrations marking 60 years since Kenya's independence from Britain. Ruto says East Africa's largest economy is no longer at risk of defaulting on bond payments following economic reforms his government had undertaken since taking power last September.
The past year, together, we have made the right choices, sometimes taken very difficult and painful decisions to steer Kenya back from the edge of a catastrophic cliff of debt distress and move our country in a new direction. There is every reason to believe proudly these sacrifices have paid off. I can now confirm, without fear of any contradiction, that Kenya is safely out of the danger of debt distress and that our economy is on a stable footing. Inflation is now 6.8%, down from a high of 9.2% a year ago. In the last 6 months, our GDP has grown at a rate of 5.4%, making Kenya the 29th fastest growing economy.
To further discuss this, Maliba Arnold, policy analyst, joins me from Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you so much for your time, Maliba.
Thank you.
Now, how does President William Ruto's statement about Kenya's emerging out of a debt distress reflect the country's current economic situation?
Well, his statement is fairly correct and reflects the economic, at least the indicators at the economic level, speak to, or rather corroborate what he's actually saying, even though what you get from social media and engagement with people is that there's been a little bit of a tinge. His statement, of course, didn't shy away from acknowledging that it's been tough. The last 1 year or so, the government has taken quite what we will call punitive measures to ensure that the country's situation remains, or rather, Kenya remains a going concern when it comes to access to credit for the sovereign debt. Just north of Kenya, you will realize that technically Ethiopia has actually defaulted, joining, I think, other countries like Zambia, and of course, the challenges that are in Ghana today. And one of those things that the people in government were so afraid were the possibility that Kenya would actually follow the same suit, having really run rough on its credit card for the last 10 years. And it's good, of course, people can actually get the confidence out of it, but the pain out of it, the taxes that have actually been put, or rather the tax measures put through the regime to ensure that we are where he says we are, have been a little bit painful to the people.
Now, talking about measures, what are the specific policies and measures that the government is taking to actually address the debt crisis and other economic challenges?
First of all, the government stopped doing subsidies. A lot of times as a country, we really had a number of subsidies that largely fed into consumption. We will subsidize consumption. He did away with that. And of course, there was a little bit of noise when it came to fuel. He also did away with, more than half of our food is actually imported. He did away with subsidies on food. And then decided that he will subsidize production. This specifically, he did subsidize agriculture, fertilizer, preparation for land. And out of it, of course, government says that they made 18 million more bags of maize, more than the previous year. At such a time last year, of course, the price of flour was about 230 shillings, Kenya shillings. Today, you will get the price of flour, the standard 2 kg package here, is at about 130 Kenya shillings. For those who do not buy packet flour, and those are about 85% of Kenyans who consume ugali or the staple food here, they do straight away from posho mills and get their maize directly milled locally. They are getting it at about 100 shillings. So the subsidy at production level when it comes to food has actually worked out. But then there has been a little bit of a problem on fuel. It's really not been the government didn't very much manage fuel prices. So, of course, they went through the roof. We expect that fuel will be going down in 2 days when the agency that is in charge of regulating prices actually announces the price for the next 30 days, but it's still much higher than where it was last year.
Now, let's talk about the impact of all of these policies, particularly at the micro level. What are the potential impacts of the policies on the country's economy and particularly the ordinary lives of Kenyans?
Initially, of course, economists were throwing around terms like the Laffer curve, where, of course, the argument has been that when you increase taxes, you then make contribution or taxation less attractive, and therefore you collect less. The truth, however, and you would look at the argument between Bush and I think Dick Cheney then, when Dick Cheney was actually pushing the idea, or rather using the Laffer curve theory to propose bringing down tax rates. But you see, the truth is that when you bring down tax rates, or when you cut on tax, two things are actually sure. Number one, you increase the sovereign deficit, and with that, you definitely are then inviting debt. So there's nowhere where tax cuts have actually improved revenue collection the way the Laffer curve argues. So one of those things that happened is that there were increases on taxes, literally on all taxes, there was an increase. And then, of course, he widened the tax collection. There were certain categories, specifically for people in the informal sector, who have got a little bit of money and weren't within what you would call the taxation net. He captured even those and brought them up. 3 days ago, the Kenya Revenue Authority said that for the first time in 6 months, they had actually crossed the 1.25 trillion Kenya shillings. That is a new mark when it comes to a half-year results. Normally, we get there when we are approaching the third quarter of the year, of the financial year. So the truth is that there has been increase in revenue collection. Of course, people say they are squeezing the little that is left with people. Banks speak of people now asking, especially employees talking about people asking for salary advances, unlike much more than they used to do in the past. So there's quite a number of policy or other consequences that came out of the policies that were done. A few companies that are multinational, for example, moved away the processing of their payrolls to neighboring countries where you then have got lesser, or rather what could be considered lesser tax burdens. Then, of course, a few employers moved their employees from permanent and pensionable to contract. A lot of employers, of course, tried to run away from having permanent employees and just had them on contract as consultants. Those are a few things, of course, definitely they then reflect in the lives of individuals and, of course, speak to the revenue. But largely, there has been an increase in revenue collection.
Okay.
So noises here and there, but then the revenue collection has actually gone much higher.
All right,
in some instances, for example,
all right, Maliba, I mean, we're pressed for time, but I would also appreciate if you can just, answer this next question in 30 seconds. Now, we understand that the president has made reference to diaspora jobs as a way of also sort of boosting the economy and also the aspect of tourism. What other, economic measures can be put in place to sort of shore up the economic growth of Kenya and Kenyans?
First of all, Kenya is a net exporter of labor. Since the 80s, Kenya has actually been putting out a lot of technical labor. But then in the last about 15 to 20 years, there has been an increase of what we would call semi-skilled labor, especially going to the Middle East and the Gulf region. And for the first time, the remittances coming from the Gulf or the East have actually superseded or rather exceeded the remittances coming in from the West and the US. That clearly speaks to the change because initially the people we sent to the West and America are actually the best. But the people we're sending to the Gulf are technical people, TVET people, domestic workers. But for the first time, we have got much more remittances coming from that end. It's a model that has actually worked for Kenya. So it's not really out there. But then two things that President William Ruto must actually focus on. Number one, bring inflation under control, proper under control. You know that the currency has been penduluming violently against the dollar. And then number two, ensure that there is sufficient stimulus to the economy to ensure that there is economic growth. If those two are then not taken care of, a lot of the pinch that we are feeling today will be paying for nothing.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Maliba.
Thank you.